America's water crisis is no longer just about farms, a river pulling back from its old shoreline, a drought map turning brown across the country. When we think of a water crisis, these are the images that come to mind. We see dry land, falling reservoirs, and farms waiting for irrigation. On the map, it looks like a weather problem. But the real warning is not only on the map. It is in the house. It is in the bill that arrives every month. The sewer charge that quietly climbs. The waterline replacement that triggers a city bond. The treatment plant that needs upgrades. The grocery receipt that reflects a food system built on irrigation. The new subdivision that cannot grow unless someone can prove where the water will come from. America's water crisis is no longer just about farms. It is becoming a hidden cost crisis. And that changes everything. As of June 9, 2026, official drought data showed nearly 47% of the United States and Puerto Rico in drought. In the lower 48 states, the share was over 56%. Those numbers matter. But the drought map is only the surface, because a water crisis does not have to shut off the tap to change daily life. It only has to make the same tap more expensive to keep running, for generations. American life was built around an invisible promise. Clean water would flow when you turned the handle. Wastewater would disappear down the drain. Farms would keep producing food. Suburbs would keep expanding. And the monthly bill would stay low enough to ignore. Today, that promise is colliding with reality. Not only because water is becoming harder to manage in some places, but because the system behind water is becoming more expensive to maintain almost everywhere. Water is not just something America uses. It is something America has to constantly rebuild. Every gallon that reaches a home has already passed through a hidden system of pumps, pipes, treatment plants, reservoirs, canals, wells, meters, crews, permits, chemistry, electricity, and debt. Most of the time, that system is invisible. You turn the handle and the water comes out. You flush and the wastewater disappears. You buy food in January and you do not think about the river, aquifer, canal, or irrigation district that helped make it possible. That invisibility is part of why the crisis is so easy to misunderstand. When people hear water crisis, they picture shortage first. A dry lake, a farmer cut off from irrigation, a town under restrictions, and those things are real. But shortage is only one layer. The deeper layer is cost. EPA's national survey estimated $625 billion in drinking water infrastructure needs over a 20-year period. A separate clean water survey reported another $630 billion in needs tied to wastewater, stormwater, and related systems. Those numbers sound abstract, but they do not stay abstract. They become rate increases, construction projects, emergency repairs, bond votes, sewer fees, treatment upgrades, replacement pipes, and more expensive compliance. And in smaller towns, they can become a brutal question. How do you spread a multi-million-dollar treatment upgrade across a limited number of households? That is where the water crisis leaves the reservoir and enters normal life. Because the family opening the monthly bill is not paying only for water. They are paying for the system behind the water. Pipes installed before today's growth. Treatment rules that did not exist when older plants were built. Contamination that has to be removed. Backup supplies. Pumping costs. Drought planning. Repairs that can no longer be delayed. For years, underinvestment can look affordable. Rates stay lower. Projects get postponed. Old pipes keep working until they do not. Then the bill arrives all at once. Not as one national invoice, but as thousands of local decisions. A city raises rates. A county studies a new water source. A utility borrows money. A small town applies for aid. A homeowner sees the charge on the bill and wonders why water suddenly costs so much more when the faucet still works. That is the hidden mechanism. A visible shortage becomes a financial system. A drought becomes an infrastructure bill. A farm problem becomes a grocery problem. A utility upgrade becomes a household budget problem. And this did not happen suddenly. America built a water-dependent life slowly. First came the farms. Irrigation turned dry places into productive places. It allowed crops to grow where rainfall alone could not support them. It helped build regional economies, food supply chains, processing plants, trucking routes, and grocery aisles far from the fields themselves. By 2015, USGS estimated that the United States withdrew about 322 billion gallons of water per day across all major uses. Irrigation alone accounted for 42% of freshwater withdrawals. That number explains why farms are always part of the water story. But it does not explain the whole story. Because while farms were using water to produce food, cities were expanding around the same assumption of reliable water. Water would be available. Pipes would deliver it. Treatment plants would clean it, and the next neighborhood could be connected to the system. Suburbs spread. Lawns appeared. Factories needed process water. Homes needed bathrooms, kitchens, washing machines, sprinklers, and sewer connections. Every new customer made the system bigger. But a bigger system is not automatically a stronger one. It needs maintenance, replacement, treatment upgrades, backup supply, engineers, crews, chemicals, electricity, pumps, and debt. For years, much of that system stayed out of sight. And because it stayed out of sight, the real cost could be delayed. Then the pressures began stacking up. Groundwater levels fell in major farm regions. Reservoirs became national warning signs. New contaminants demanded new treatment. Old pipes reached the end of their useful life. Fast-growing regions had to ask whether the next subdivision could be served. And households began seeing the cost not as a water crisis, but as one more bill that would not stop rising. The drought did not create every weakness. It exposed them. And once those weaknesses are exposed, geography decides who feels the pressure first. In the West, the visible crisis may be a dropping reservoir. In the high plains, it may be an emptying aquifer. In older cities, it may be a crumbling pipe network. And in fast-growing suburbs, it may become a barrier to growth. Take the High Plains aquifer. Between pre-development and 2019, this massive underground reserve lost an estimated 286.4 million acre-feet of recoverable storage. Average water levels declined 16.5 feet. There is no dramatic shoreline to photograph there. It is a quieter crisis, deeper wells, harder farm decisions, rising pressure on local economies, and a difficult question. What happens when yesterday's resource cannot support tomorrow's production? Now look at Arizona. In the Hasayampa sub-basin west of Phoenix, state water officials released a groundwater model showing 4 million acre-feet of unmet groundwater demand over a 100-year period. That did not mean existing homes suddenly had no water. Buckeye said existing homes and businesses already developed there had a certified 100-year assured water supply. But for new subdivisions that wanted to rely on groundwater, the message was different. The state cannot approve new subdivisions in that area if they intend to rely on groundwater that the model does not show as physically available over the 100-year planning period. The crisis did not appear as a dry faucet. It appeared as a planning limit, a housing question, a growth question, a cost question. Who gets to build? Who has to find a different water source? Who pays for the infrastructure? And what happens to housing affordability when water becomes part of the permission to grow? That is the hidden cost crisis in miniature. Water still flows. Homes still exist. The city still functions. But the old assumption that growth can simply connect to the next available supply becomes harder to defend. And once that happens in one fast-growing place, it becomes a warning for others. Because wherever the pressure begins, in a river, a well, a pipe, a treatment plant, or a farm field, the cost eventually has to land somewhere. More often than Americans realize, it lands at the kitchen table. To understand why this crisis is becoming more expensive, it helps to separate the pressure into 3 forces: supply pressure, system pressure, household pressure. Supply pressure is the part people can see: the low river, the dry field, the brown drought map, the well that has to reach deeper, the farm that cannot count on the same water it used to. Supply pressure changes behavior. Farmers may change what they plant. Cities may restrict outdoor watering. Utilities may look for backup supplies. Developers may face harder questions about growth. But supply pressure is only the first force. The second force is system pressure. This is the part buried underground. America does not only need water, it needs systems that can move it, clean it, store it, test it, and carry it away after it has been used. Pipes, pumps, treatment plants, reservoirs, wells, sewer lines, storm drains, meters, electricity, crews, chemicals, and debt. A community may still have water, but still need a more expensive system to deliver it safely. A city may not be running dry, but still need to replace pipes. A town may not be in crisis today, but still need to upgrade a treatment plant. A utility may have enough water in the source, but not enough money to keep the system affordable. That is why water can become more expensive even when the tap still works, and new treatment requirements are adding pressure. USGS estimated that at least 45% of U.S. tap water could contain one or more PFAS tested in its study. That does not mean every sample was unsafe. It does not mean every household faces the same risk. But PFAS can require costly testing, treatment, and filtration when water systems need to remove them. That cost does not disappear. It moves into utility budgets, and eventually, some of it can move toward the household. That is the third force, household pressure. Families do not experience a federal infrastructure estimate. They experience a bill, a higher base charge, a sewer fee, a rate increase, a local tax, a grocery receipt, a filter purchase, a restriction notice, a development fight that affects housing, a town budget meeting that decides whether the system gets repaired now or later. When supply pressure and system pressure meet, household pressure usually follows. This is the part that makes the crisis bigger than farms. Agriculture is a major part of the water story, but households are tied to the same system in different ways. They depend on farms for food. They depend on utilities for drinking water. They depend on sewer systems for public health. They depend on local governments for pipes, permits, treatment, planning, and emergency repair. So when water becomes harder to supply, harder to clean, harder to move, or harder to finance, the pressure does not stay in one sector. It spreads. A farm region feels it through planting decisions. A city feels it through infrastructure debt. A suburb feels it through growth limits. A family feels it through monthly bills. A grocery shopper feels it through food prices. A small town feels it through a water system that still has to be maintained, even when the tax base is small. The human cost of a water crisis does not always begin with an empty tap. Sometimes it begins with a choice. A farmer looks at a field and decides what can be planted with less water. A city engineer looks at a pipe map and decides which repair can wait. A local utility looks at a treatment upgrade and decides whether rates have to rise. A family opens the bill and decides what else has to be pushed back this month. In 2023, USDA counted more than 212 zone irrigating farms in the United States. Those farms irrigated about 53 million acres and applied 81 million acre-feet of water. That is the farm side of the story, and it is real. But every irrigated acre is connected to something beyond itself: a processing plant, a trucking route, a grocery store, a rural school, a tax base, a town where the farm economy helps decide whether Main Street stays alive. So when water becomes less reliable, the first question may be agricultural. What gets planted? What gets cut back? What costs more to produce? But the second question is economic. Who else depends on that farm still working? In a city, the human cost looks different. The water may still come out of the faucet, but the system behind the faucet may be under pressure. A treatment plant may need upgrades. A sewer line may need replacement. A utility may need to test for contaminants that older systems were never designed to handle. A city may need to borrow money, raise rates, or delay something else. For households, that becomes a different kind of stress. Not the drama of no water, the pressure of more expensive water. The water bill is rarely the largest bill in the house. But that is exactly why it matters. Because when smaller bills rise across the entire household budget, they do not feel small anymore. A few dollars more for water, a few dollars more for sewer, a few dollars more for groceries, a few dollars more for insurance, a few dollars more for electricity. Normal life becomes more expensive not through one bill alone, but through the stack. And water is now part of that stack. You can choose to drive less to save on gas. You can skip a meal out to save money. But you cannot opt out of needing water. You cannot opt out of sewer service. You cannot opt out of the pipes, pumps, treatment plants, crews, and financing that keep the system working. That is what makes water different. It is essential, it is local, and it is increasingly expensive to keep reliable. There is no single villain to blame. Not farmers alone, not developers alone, not utilities alone, not regulators alone. Agriculture uses a large share of water, but farms also produce food and support rural economies. Cities and suburbs need water for homes, hospitals, schools, restaurants, businesses, parks, and fire protection. Utilities deserve scrutiny when rates rise, but a rising water bill is not automatically proof of waste. Sometimes it is the price of old infrastructure finally being replaced. Sometimes it is the price of removing contaminants. Sometimes it is the price of complying with modern safety rules. Sometimes it is the price of drought planning. And sometimes it is the price of a small town trying to maintain a system that was never cheap, only postponed. The harder truth is that America is trying to keep an old promise under new conditions. The promise was simple. Turn the handle, and clean water comes out. Flush, and wastewater disappears. Plant, and irrigation makes food possible. Build, and the next subdivision connects to the system. Pay the bill, and the service remains affordable. But that promise was built on assumptions that are getting weaker. Stable supply, manageable infrastructure costs, available groundwater, affordable treatment, room for growth, trust in the tap. The water crisis is not a single failure. It is a collision between how America was built and what it now costs to keep that system running. The future water crisis may not announce itself with sudden silence from the faucet. The water may still flow. The meter may still spin. The bill may still arrive on time. But as a family sits at the kitchen table, looking at a statement that keeps climbing, the question becomes harder to avoid. How did normal life get this expensive? At the end of this story, the image is not only a dry reservoir. It is not only a farm field waiting for rain. It is an ordinary kitchen sink. Water still runs. The glass still fills. The house still looks normal from the street. But beside that sink is the part of the crisis people do not always see. A bill on the counter, a grocery receipt, a notice from the city, a family budget already stretched by housing, insurance, electricity, food, and everything else normal life now requires. That is the hidden cost crisis. Not the end of water. The end of cheap certainty. America's water crisis is no longer just about places that look dry. It is about places that still look normal. The subdivision where every house has a faucet. The small town with a water tower above the main road. The farm region still producing food. The city still growing. The family still paying the bill. The faucet still runs. The meter still turns. The bill still arrives. And somewhere between the sink and the kitchen table, the country's water crisis becomes personal.